Hello, and welcome back to Find My Past Masterclasses. This is the essential guide to British and Irish family history. Today we are going to conclude Innovation in Ireland, Creative Resources for Your Irish Research. This is part 2 of a series. My name is Jen Baldwin. I'm the Data Acquisition Manager for North America for Find My Past, and I have been working for the last couple of years on my own Irish family, what their story was like, and what their exploration was like moving from Ireland, then actually to Wales, and then over to America. In this process, I've learned that there is a lot of opportunity in non-traditional genealogical materials, resources, and websites for us to learn more about our Irish ancestors' lives. That's a little bit of what I hope to explore with you today. So today we're going to look specifically at the process of surname clusters and surname research. We're going to look at some major Irish record collections that you definitely need to know about and utilize. We're going to look at civil registration districts and place names, kind of looking at Ireland from a geographical perspective. We're going to touch on some of those non-traditional record sets that I have learned to very much appreciate. And then we're going to finish with just a bit more education opportunities where you can learn a little bit more and some of the resources that I keep my eye on so that I don't overlook a new or important Irish potential opportunity for research. So let's start with those surname clusters. Now, surname clusters can be a very useful tool when it comes to Irish research, but really, in any genealogical research, studying the surname and the geographic spread of that surname can be useful. I also apply these methods to research in England and Wales, for example. It's important when you're looking at surnames that you understand all the various spelling variants. There are a lot of ways to spell a lot of different names, and when and how those names evolved can really impact your research depending on the time frame that you're talking about. So take the time to really try and think of as many different surname variants as you can. Now, this may sound a little crazy, but one trick I learned a couple years ago is I pulled aside my daughter, who at the time I think was 5 or 6. She was just learning how to write and to spell, but she hadn't yet moved beyond phonetic spelling. So I sat her down and I asked her to write a surname as many ways as she could think of. And she came up with a lot of different creative ideas. But when I went back and actually plugged some of those variations into a search engine or a genealogy site, I actually had some successful hits. There were variations of spellings that I had never thought of and probably never would have thought of. So if nothing else, find your local neighborhood little kid and ask them to sit down and spell some names for you. Trust me on this one, it works. The other piece of surname clusters that's important is to really study the geographical trends of where people with a certain surname resided, because they often resided together or close by, and you can watch those trends change over time. So if you look at a surname in, let's say, 1865, look at that same surname in 1800, and then look at it again in 1900, and understand how that surname moved around the island over the course of 100 years or 200 years. So you really get an understanding of their migration patterns as well as a surname population. Now, my favorite place to start with my surname research is on the website of John Grinham. It's John Grinham's Irish Surnames. You can see the URL on the screen, johngrinham.com/surnames. Mr. Grinham has provided these resources and this database for us for free. There is no charge, there's no registration. You just go to the website and plop in a surname. And it's really helpful because he pulls together in one bucket with one simple search all of these really important databases and record sets like Griffiths valuation and Roman Catholic records, which we'll actually look at very soon. And he pulls it all together and provides that data to you on a map with links to other resources. He provides it on a table format. We'll look at all that in just a second. But it's a really useful website, so it's a great place to start. This type of surname research is especially helpful if you already have information on your person's spouse, their children, or other relations of that individual, so that you can make those common connections. And, if you're looking for someone named John McGowan, but you know that his wife's maiden name was quite unusual, you can use those clues to help kind of narrow down and narrow into the right family. Otherwise, it's a bit of a needle in a haystack. It's also incredibly helpful if you're using surname research in collaboration with or next to genetic genealogy. Because those genetic resources are starting to get us a little bit closer in terms of geographical location, we can use those genetic matches to really pinpoint where our ancestors may have been and work with cousins around the world in order to further our research. So use those two tools in combination with each other. It can be very powerful. Let's take a look at John's website, though, here quickly. I typed in the surname McKinsey. That's the family that I happen to be working on right now. And I get this wonderful resource. Now, again, it looks relatively simple, and it is. It's very clean. It's very straightforward. But what he's done is built all of these resources into one page for us. So again, he's put all of those materials into one bucket. I particularly like the map, and I'll show you that kind of close up in just a second. But notice on either side of the map in the margins, there are statistics on how many variants you find in Griffiths, for example. So different spellings, that's another opportunity to learn all the different variations of a surname. There's also links directly to McKinsey's found on the 1901 census or the 1911 census, or in those Roman Catholic baptism records. So use everything on the page that you can click on. Go ahead and click on it because you will learn something that could potentially be of interest to you. Now, let's take a closer look at that map. I'm a very visual person, so I really like the map, but you'll see pretty easily that more common occurrences are in blue, and those are generally larger circles. And then less frequent occurrences are in green, and the circles vary in size. So it gives you a really good visual idea of where you might find your ancestors by that surname. And then the table at the bottom, of course, is county by county, how many instances they found in Griffiths of that surname in that particular county. So in County Cork, there were 3. In County Sligo, there were 6 with that surname in Griffiths valuation. So really useful tools in terms of doing this type of surname research. And if you want to learn more, we're going to move on to some record sets you need to look at because we don't have a lot of time together. But if you want to learn more about this process, there's a lot of resources online about how to do this type of research. Really, my objective today was just to introduce you to the thought process so that you could start to apply this to your Irish research. But use your favorite search engine and find some of those articles and how-to guides in terms of doing surname research. This is a well-known and certainly successful methodology for many years, and people have been using it specifically in Ireland for some time. So take a look at those additional resources. Let's move into some of those Irish collections you need to know about. There are a couple that I really want to share with you today. The first is the Irish Roman Catholic Sacramental Registers. And then we will quickly look at Griffiths valuation and the Civil Registers Index. But we're also going to spend a few minutes on Percy. And that one, if you're familiar with Percy, you may not think of immediately when you think of Irish research. But hopefully by the time we're done, you'll be convinced that it's a resource you need to look at. But let's start again with those Irish Roman Catholic records. Now, this is arguably one of the most important collections to go online for Irish research ever, possibly. But certainly in the last couple of years, it's an incredibly substantial record set. Even if you think your ancestors weren't Irish, weren't Catholic, you need to look at this record set just to make sure, because there are so many people here. So the images were originally put online by the National Library of Ireland back in 2015, but they put it up as a browse only, meaning you had to go page by page, image by image, to dig through the collection and actually look at each particular image to find your person of interest. And when you're talking about more than 7 million baptism records, that can take an awful long time. So Find My Past and Ancestry actually got together and worked on this in collaboration, and we built an index together. We both did this in tandem, and we published them on each website simultaneously. There, again, are over 7 million baptism records here. And a traditional baptism in the Roman Catholic faith has the name of the child, the name of the parents, and at least 2 sponsors or witnesses. Often those particular individuals are relations to the child or to the family in some way. And then, of course, the minister is often also recorded. So there's a great deal of information here beyond just the event of baptism. There could be up to 5 or 6 names of interest recorded in these records. So it's well worth your time. Now, there are over 1,000 parishes covered, and this collection is actually free on Find My Past. You don't need a subscription to look at these materials. Just to give you an idea of kind of what this looks like, this is a very common example, happens to come from March 1844, and you can see why the index was so necessary and why we rushed to do that so quickly, because they can be very difficult to read, and of course at times the handwriting is quite tricky. This particular example is relatively clear, but it's dark. The color varies quite a bit from image to image. So it was important that that index was built and shared in as much of a collaboration as possible. So that was a quick review on Irish Catholic. Just to note that if you're looking for your Irish ancestors who were Catholic that came to the United States, the Catholic Heritage Archive on Find My Past has actually grown to include New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Chicago, and other cities will be added eventually, and well, within very soon, actually. So if you're looking for an Irish Catholic who came over and you're still working on that American angle, then by all means check the Roman Catholic collection on Find My Past. We're going to move over to Griffiths valuation. If you're new to Irish research, this one is kind of one of those key essential record sets. If you are not new to Irish research, it's still a key essential record set. It's an incredibly important document process for Irish research. And it is actually relatively easy to use, even though it doesn't feel like a traditional genealogy record set. When you first look at it, it really has some really outstanding material for us as genealogists. It's a mid-19th century census substitute, so all of those census records that we lost in the 1922 fire, in many cases you can find similar information here. It is technically a survey of boundaries and land valuation, so it was an assignment from the government to actually go out and determine what each parcel of land was worth. The process was completed in 1868, but it's worth it to look at when your county was actually surveyed, when the county of interest was surveyed. And you can find that information pretty easily across many genealogy sites, but you can even find it on Wikipedia. The maps I also like. They include plot numbers that are attached to the property, and it makes it much easier for you to see neighbors and sizes of property and that kind of thing. Those maps are actually only available on Find My Past. Let's take a look at a pretty common example. This is just one that I kind of randomly picked. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find my own family in Griffiths valuation, so this is just a random example. But you can see right off the bat, right? There's a name for the head of household, the person residing. There is their status, whether they are the person who is renting the property or they are the person who owns the property. And again, the description of the tenement is right there in the middle. It tells you what that property looked like, tells you about acreage, and then, of course, the annual valuation, what it was actually worth in terms of the property itself. When you apply that information and then you turn it over and you look at the maps, you get actually quite a bit of detail. So from the map, you can see where their neighbors were, which number they were assigned in the valuation. So if they're number 21 on the map, if it's household 21, then they're number 21 for that area on the valuation itself, and back and vice versa. But you can see the size of the property and the scope of what it covered. Again, Griffiths valuation, very important resource for Irish research, and really a starting place for many of us when we first discover our Irish connection. Again, this one is specifically helpful after you've gotten beyond, well, I just know he was born in Ireland. You want to know a little bit more about your individual before you turn to some of these resources. Now, the civil registration districts are important to understand in Ireland, just as they are in England and other British Isles areas. There were originally, the districts were based on 160 medical districts. And they cross the boundaries of the counties in many cases. So if you're looking at a specific county and you can't find records on your family and you're really convinced they should be there, you need to look at the civil registration districts and the parishes in separation from the county, because they all had different lines, they all had different boundaries, and it's important to understand what those districts were. So events recorded in a county were often recorded in a county other than where the person lived. So understand that as well, that just because they lived in one county, they could be recorded in another. And just because they lived in one civil registration, they could be recorded in a neighboring district. So important to understand all of these border changes. And the reason I bring this up now is because of our third kind of primary resource that you need to look at, and that's the Ireland Civil Registers Index. Now, this has been online for some time, and it's available in a variety of different places. Find My Past just recently renewed this, if you will, kind of new and improved. The index originally just included, kind of basic information in terms of names of the individuals, but now we have added to the index to include the mother's maiden name, the father's occupation, and full dates of birth. So for the birth category, we're up to 2.7 million entries. And for marriages, we're at 2.6 million entries. That now includes the names of the couple's parents, the father's occupation, residence, and marital status. So what went from a very basic one name kind of index has now actually become a much more comprehensive index to help you find the record that you're looking for. Now, this index is important because these images are available online on other sites through the Irish government. We'll show you that in a second. But their search capabilities are not quite as robust, and they do not provide an index. So we've made the index as comprehensive as we can. When you go to Find My Past, this is what it looks like. I've just done a basic search. I've actually looked for Daniel McNamara, who is, again, one of my own ancestors. And I found this example. I actually don't think this is him, but it was a good example. This particular individual was born the 14th of August, 1868. So you can see up at the top there that we have a very complete birth date. As you move down the transcription, you see his father was James McNamara, and then his mother was Elizabeth Braniff. You have a residence, you have a registration year, you have the volume and page number of the original record. So you can go and go back to this original source. You can go back and look at this, and you have full citation information for your research. Now, it's really important, of course, that you do click on View the Source Record, because we always want to look at the originals whenever that's possible for us to do. What that does is it actually redirects you to the irishgenealogy.ie website, which we showed you in part 1 of this series. You click through a couple of security measures to make sure you're not a robot, you're an actual human being, and it ultimately leads you to the image that you're looking for. Now, Daniel McNamara happens to be the first entry on this particular register, and it shows all of that information. But this would have been very difficult for me to find if I had just gone to irishgenealogy.ie directly. Using the index, and this more robust index from Find My Past, allowed me to get through that process a lot faster and actually narrow down the options to say, yes, that's really the person I'm interested in, or no, that's actually not my guy. So it really cuts down on that time and that effort and gives us the chance to go directly to the record in a much more efficient way. All right, so a couple of other resources that I want to share with you, and we're going to kind of move into this place name idea. This is the place names database of Ireland. Note that it had to actually be translated from Irish to English. The site is actually written in Irish, and you can certainly search through this system, and you can just throw in a word and hit search. But actually, from their homepage here, which you're just seeing a portion of, I would actually invite you to scroll down to find a link to their glossary and distribution maps. How many of us have run into a situation where there's more than one location by a particular name? Actually happens all the time, right? So understanding where all those locations are located is really important and can really change how we research a particular area or family. So in this case, we're going to explore these maps to get an idea of how much work you need to do to narrow down the options of the place you're looking for. In this particular example, I've just searched for a particular location. You can see it up at the top, Curadoc, and I have found that there are several mentions and several uses of this particular word, also seen in pink to the right-hand side. I'm not going to try to pronounce it because I always mess it up, but it gives you, in terms of a glossary, it gives you in terms of a definition. In English, it means plain, and examples include Mayo and Muff and East Fermoy. So use these maps to really understand how frequent these terms are in over the course of Ireland. Also understand, again, where they are centric, where they are most heavily or prevalent, right? If you have several places near each other, all by the same name, there's got to be a reason why so many different locations were named the same thing. So dig into that a little bit, especially if it coincides with your surname cluster map and you know that that's a region you're interested in. Another wonderful tool to use is the Irely Atlas. It's a little tricky to say, a Townland database. And you can find it at the URL on the screen. It's www.thecore.com/Sean Rued. That's the individual who actually created it. Now, it looks a little bit dated, but it's actually really helpful. And you can see it's a very simple, straightforward search form. You just plug in your area of interest and you hit search, and this is what you end up with. In this example, I actually just did a search for Donegal, and I found a variety of different townlands in a couple of different counties. And then, of course, it breaks it down to barony, parish, the province, etc. So it gives us 9 results and a great number of details that you may not have really noticed before. I didn't actually think I knew before this process that there was a Donegal in County Cork. But when you look at the map, you do see it there, and you realize that, well, gosh, if my ancestor was born in Donegal, well, which one? And how do I figure that out? So it is important that we do this kind of background knowledge check on ourselves and make sure that we're covering all of our bases, especially, again, if you think he should be in Donegal, in County Donegal, but you can't find him there, maybe there is a reason for that. Maybe he's actually in a different county. Or he's in a different province or a different parish. So all of these things are important to keep in mind and really useful tools in terms of narrowing down where and how to research our Irish ancestors. Now, one of my favorite tools, actually, is the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage, and this is buildingsofireland.ie. And you may be thinking, why in the world would she talk about architectural heritage in a genealogy webinar? But I think that this site is actually pretty important for those of us especially who maybe can't get over to Ireland itself. I don't know that I'll ever make it over to Ireland. Maybe someday I will. But in terms of putting myself into my ancestors' kind of footprints, right? And being able to see what the landscape was like, being able to see what that community was like, I really enjoy this website for that purpose. Now, you can do all sorts of things on this site, but one of the pieces that I use most frequently is their building survey. You can search this site kind of by keyword or name, or you can just kind of play around with the maps and look around at the different communities. If you want to use kind of select an individual survey, you can either click on the interactive map in red, or of course you can search by map, or you can use their drop-down menu. There's a lot of different options here. One of the things that I like to do the most actually is find an area in which my ancestor might have lived and review some of the historic buildings in that community. So in this example, we're looking at Cork City, and I just pulled up kind of a random building to see what its history was. This is the Catholic Young Men's Society Hall. It was built in 1860. So theoretically, it was there, or actually probably under construction when my ancestor lived in Cork. So this is a building that he may have seen, or he may have been involved in or engaged with in some way. He may have watched it go up. And you get these wonderful pictures and the history and the description of the particular property. The other piece of this that I really like doing is clicking up at the top where it says View Location on Map. And this brings up some really detailed maps of all of these different areas of Ireland. And I really enjoy using maps in my research. So for me, this is kind of map heaven, because you get to get so close in, you get so much detail on these maps. And I can see here that right next to that Catholic Young Men's Hall is, a clothing store. There's a jeweler's down the street. I can see where the churches are located, and that's my location there. So that's the Catholic Young Men's Society Hall. I can see that just a block away is St. Augustine's Church. It's Catholic. The courthouse is a block and a half down the street. You can see all of that perspective without ever leaving your house. And of course, for someone who may not ever get to research in person in Ireland itself, this is a fantastic way to really kind of feel your way around the community. Now, there are other ways to do this, of course. You can use Google Maps, Google Earth, those kinds of programs. But I particularly like this website because it gives you the history of those buildings. So you can actually pinpoint the ones that were there or should have been there when your ancestor lived there as well, because you have that historical information to go along with it. So it's an exciting website. It's a wonderful resource. Play around with it and see what you can do, because if you enjoy kind of digging into the context of your ancestors' environment, I think you'll really find that this website can really get a little bit addictive. So some non-traditional record sources that we want to mention. We absolutely recognize that because of the record loss in Ireland, we need to think creatively in finding other records that do the same type of job for us. So we've talked about the Catholic parish registers, we've talked about Griffiths, but what about things like petty session court records and newspapers and the Irish poverty relief loans? We need to look at substituting kind of traditional records like censuses with these other categories of records. So we're going to look at just a couple of those examples. Let's start with the landed estates court records. These courts were actually established in 1848. There were 8,000 rentals and 500,000 names of tenants. So this is a massive collection, really. It was really the first significant step towards the breakup of the old estates in Ireland. So the original estate records were usually destroyed. So the court records actually then become these essential replacements. One example you can see here is just kind of a basic description. It doesn't look very interesting or fancy, but when you zoom in on that example there that I've got at the bottom, these are brothers who are living next to each other in two houses, and you can see that the lease started in 1800. But remember, these records actually begin in 1848. We go to the bottom of the description and we find that William's son is now the only survivor on the property, and other details of the family. So it's actually a really pretty amazing little blurb of history just specifically on this family. And you'll find entries like this over and over and over again in these estate records. We also want to look at prison records. Now, of course, I'm not implying that all of our Irish ancestors were criminals, although I have to admit one of mine was. I actually just found another newspaper article of a bar fight that he was involved in, and he went to jail. So I have found him in these records, but this collection is really massive and includes records from all levels of Irish courts. So neighborly disputes could be included in here, or disputes over, ownership of a stock animal, that kind of thing. Our first example is going to be the petty sessions courts. Now, they were established in 1827, and they initiated mandatory record keeping in 1851. So there's a great deal of time between when the court was established and when they actually were required to keep records, but there are some of those early records available to us as well. Also note that this is a full name index. So if your ancestor was a witness or a judge or took some other role in the court system, they will also be indexed by name in this collection. So a very common example just on this one page to show you kind of the scope of what you might find. Right at the top, there's a road disturbance. Someone let their pigs kind of wander into the road and their neighbors took them to court and they were fined. Then there's a drunk and disorderly after that. Then they found a dog without a license, and we'll actually look at that in a minute, but dog licenses were required, so that person was fined as well. And then finally, at the end of the day, in this particular court in County Wexford, there's a violent stabbing case that has to come in front of the judge. So there's a variety of different reasons why your ancestor might end up in these records. Not all of them were criminal. Many of them, again, were civil or neighborly disputes. So definitely take a look at these records because they put your ancestor in a place and a time, but they also give context of what their life was like, what their relationship was like, maybe with a particular neighbor or other individuals in the community. Really gives you some really wonderful context to work from. Now, I did mention the dog license rule in Ireland, and we do have, in fact, on Find My Past, the dog license books. There are 1,200 registers here covering 6 million names. Dog licenses were a significant source of funding. They were a tax, essentially, so you had to license every dog that you owned every year. So in that case, it's an important census substitute because it does give us our ancestors in a place and a time. But in some cases, it also includes some fun information about the dogs themselves. A pretty typical example looks just like this. You'll see the name of the owner, their residence, the day that they licensed their animal, and then the fee that was paid, which I always find to be interesting when somebody has to pay more or less. And I always kind of wonder why and what can I learn about that scenario. And then you have a description of the animal, so their sex, their color, their breed, and then you have remarks. In some cases, like in this example, you actually get what appears to be names. So in most cases, these are likely the names of the dogs, actually. I like down on line 528, you can see that the dog's name was Charlie. And I would just love to know that my ancestors owned a dog named Charlie or whatever name they gave them. I think it's a really fun little piece of history that we can find on our ancestors. All right, so the last very specific record set I want to talk about today is PERSI, the Periodical Source Index. Now, if you're not familiar with PERSI, I would invite you to go to the Find My Past blog and read up on this particular tool because it's different than most other genealogy resources. It's a subject-based index of genealogy and history-related publications. Now, the key there is subject-based. It's not necessarily indexed by name. There are many articles in PERSI that are indexed by name, but not all of them. PERSI was actually created about 25 years ago by the Allen County Public Library in Fort Wayne, Indiana, when they realized that there were all these wonderful publications out there that were sharing stories and research and record sets in their local communities, but there was no way for someone on the other side of the country to say, wow, the California Genealogical Society published an article about my ancestor and I want to find it. There's no way for them to do that. So they created this index so that we could learn about all of these other resources. Now, it is global in scope, but it is primarily North American and European. So there will be a lot of publications from England and Ireland. And many of these publications now have images attached through the Find My Past version of PERSI. And in many cases, those can only be found online via this collection. So you're going to get a lot of variety in these records when you search on PERSI. Now, if we want to go specifically looking at Irish resources, because that is our topic, we can look to an example like this one. This is the American Catholic Historical Researchers publication. This is the July 1901 issue. It's actually issue 3, volume 18. And it's an article about early Irish immigration to America, actually from a Catholic perspective. But in this one article, we have all of this wonderful information. The author of the article actually pulls examples from newspapers around the Philadelphia area prior to 1750. So he's pulling statistics from historical newspapers that we may not have access to today. And he finds things like in 1729, 5,655 Irish arrived in Philadelphia. That's his summary of his research. And you can see the other examples there on the screen. So it's an early look at Catholic Irish immigration to America, specifically Irish immigration. And so if you're looking for information or clues about an early Irish immigrant in the Philadelphia area, this article may lead you down a brand new path that you've never thought of before. And it may give you insight into what that experience was like and what those numbers were like. If we know the statistics behind our ancestors' immigration, we can make better hypotheses around where we should research. And this article actually was several pages long. This is just one example from that particular article. Now, we may also find in genealogy publications that are well known that the answers are just right there waiting for us. So utilize Percy to get to these articles as well. This example is from the New York Genealogical and Biographical Record. This is actually their October 2015 issue. It's volume 146. In which we find this multi-page article, again, a heavily researched genealogy of a family who came into New York City. And it's a relatively recent article, but it is available through Percy. In this, he actually tells us that the place of origin for this particular family was relatively easy to find because it was printed in the family's Book of Common Prayer, which is, of course, a Protestant text versus a Catholic text. So he actually discusses how this book would not necessarily be commonly found in Catholic families. So if your family has a Book of Common Prayer, you can at least hypothesize that they were in fact Protestant versus Catholic. And of course, in this particular example, it actually had the birth location and the name of the family right there inside the book, just like a family Bible might. So a couple of examples from Percy. I would strongly encourage you again to utilize Percy and find these kinds of little nuggets of clues in combination with your surname studies, your geographical studies, and some of those more historically based resources versus genealogically based resources. You may find that you have discovered a completely new path of research. Now, we've talked about a lot today, and we have just a couple more elements to look at, but we're just going to refocus for a second on our strategy. We talked in part one about how important it is to have a good mindset around Irish research that incorporates a strategy, some creativity, and ongoing education. So congratulations to all of you listening, because you are well on your way to that education path. But there are some other resources to be aware of. So let's look at some of those for just a second. If you work at all in Northern Ireland research, you probably already know about PRONI. It is the Public Records Office of Northern Ireland. And a couple of years ago, they actually redid their website. It looks like this now. This is just one little snippet. On the older version of the website, actually, they had some really useful information, some educational materials that is now either gone or it's just so difficult to find it that I actually can't find it. So to replace that or to rediscover that material, I actually went to the Wayback Machine, which allows me to see sites that once existed on the internet that aren't live anymore. And in this particular system, I can find the old version of the PRONI website, and I can reutilize some of that information that I have lost on the new site. And it gives me, again, local history, in particular parishes by county and other resources and databases that I can utilize to learn more about Northern Ireland specifically. So I would encourage you to use sites like the Wayback Machine to dig up old material on the internet that is maybe now harder to find or has just been taken down. Another wonderful resource is the Irish Lives Remembered Genealogy Magazine. This is a digital magazine. You can find it pretty easily online. Just Google it or use your favorite search engine. They do have, obviously, a focus on Irish genealogy. It's a well-written publication, and they have usually have some kind of a focus each month or each 2 months. Actually, I guess they publish bi-monthly, and usually focuses on a particular location or county. Sometimes the magazine has a theme. So watch this and certainly subscribe to their lists and look at them online. Really excellent resource for learning. One example is this article. I just kind of picked it at random, but it talks about a particular Irish unit that fought at Gallipoli. It is important to understand, of course, our Irish ancestors' involvement in British engagements and other military efforts because there was such combination between the Irish and English populations. So it gives you a great review. It's written by local experts in most cases, has just some really outstanding scholarly work to review and understand. Another website that I refer to regularly is Enniklin. It is a research firm in Ireland. Actually, they do research for you, but they've got some resources on their website, like this one that talks about different occupations or common occupations in Ireland. And it talks about, in this example, my ancestor was a policeman, and it talks about what that service might have been like and some various resources. So again, another useful way for us to just kind of learn for ourselves what common roles were in the Irish community. You can see off to the left, there's clergymen and farming and teachers and that kind of thing. It's a relatively minimal site in terms of resources, but it's definitely worth taking a look at and reading through and just kind of bookmarking so that if you ever find reference to one of these occupations, you can quickly go back to it. The last thing I want to mention, of course, is social media. And for this, actually, for Ireland in particular, I find that Pinterest is an incredibly well-used platform for social media users. There are a lot of posts and articles and maps about Irish genealogy on Pinterest and other social media sites as well, but Pinterest happens to be one that that I find quite useful. I really like all of the maps that people have created and made available on the site. Of course, there's always a caution to be careful when you use social media, but it is a good resource for those of us to use to acquire information or to find different resources that we can read through. With that, we're going to go ahead and conclude for the day our part 2 on innovation in Ireland. I hope you've enjoyed your time with us, and I hope to see you back soon on Find My Past master classes. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.